The crackling of the campfire filled the air as a group of park rangers huddled together, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The night was dark and still, the only sounds being the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was a rare moment of respite for the rangers of Whispering Pines, a chance to relax and share stories after a long day patrolling the haunted forest. As the rangers sipped their hot coffee and exchanged tales of their experiences, an older ranger named Jack cleared his throat. The others fell silent, knowing that when Jack spoke, it was usually to share a story of great importance. With a grave expression on his weathered face, Jack began to recount the legend of the Shadow Woman. "It all started back in the early 1900s, Jack said, his voice low and steady. There was a young woman named Evelyn who lived in a small cabin at the edge of the forest. She was a beautiful and kind-hearted soul, with long, raven-black hair and piercing green eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the forest itself. Evelyn was loved by all who knew her, and her presence brought a sense of warmth and comfort to the small town that bordered Whispering Pines." Jack took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant as he recalled the tale. Evelyn spent her days exploring the woods, foraging for berries and herbs, and tending to the small garden behind her cabin. She had a deep connection with nature, and the forest seemed to welcome her presence. But one fateful day, when the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, Evelyn ventured into the woods to gather berries, and never returned. The rangers leaned in closer, their eyes wide with anticipation as Jack continued. The town searched for days, scouring every inch of the forest, but no trace of Evelyn was ever found. It was as if the woods had swallowed her whole. Search parties combed through the dense undergrowth, calling out her name until their voices grew hoarse, but the only response was the eerie silence of the forest. As time passed, rumors began to spread of a ghostly figure seen wandering the forest at night. A woman with long, dark hair and a flowing white dress. They say it's Evelyn's spirit, still searching for a way back home, forever trapped between the world of the living and the dead. Jack paused, his gaze drifting to the dark tree line that surrounded the campsite. The rangers followed his gaze, a chill running down their spines as they imagined the ghostly figure lurking in the shadows. The wind picked up, causing the branches to creak and groan like ancient bones, and the flames of the campfire danced wildly, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. "But there's more to the story," Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some say that Evelyn's disappearance was no accident. They whisper of dark rituals and sacrifices, of an ancient evil that dwells deep within the heart of the forest. Rumors of a secret cult that practiced black magic and made offerings to the dark entity that called Whispering Pines its home. And now, Evelyn's spirit is tied to that evil, forever bound to the woods that claimed her life, a vengeful specter that seeks to lure others into the same fate that befell her." The rangers sat in stunned silence, the weight of Jack's words hanging heavy in the air. They had all heard stories of the strange occurrences in Whispering Pines, of hikers who vanished without a trace, and the eerie whispers that echoed through the trees. But none had heard the full story of Evelyn and the Shadow Woman, nor the dark secrets that the forest held. "They say that on moonless nights, when the forest is at its darkest, you can hear Evelyn's mournful cries carried on the wind, a haunting melody that sends shivers down your spine," Jack continued, his voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "And if you're unfortunate enough to catch a glimpse of her spectral form, with her pale skin and hollow, sunken eyes, you must act quickly. Close your eyes, count to 10, and pray that when you open them, she's gone. For if she remains, if you allow yourself to be drawn in by her unearthly beauty and the promise of secrets untold, you'll be lost forever, doomed to wander the forest as one of her ghostly thralls." Jack's voice took on a somber tone. "And that, my fellow rangers, is why we warn everyone who sets foot in Whispering Pines to beware of the Shadow Woman. For if you see her in the darkness, you must close your eyes and pray that she doesn't follow. Because if she does, if you allow yourself to be lured into her embrace, you may never escape her grasp. Your soul will be forever bound to the cursed forest, just like Evelyn's. and you'll become another legend, another cautionary tale whispered around campfires like this one. Jack fell silent, his gaze fixed on the dying embers of the campfire. As the crackling of the campfire filled the silence left by Jack's haunting tale, the park rangers of Whispering Pines leaned in closer, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. Jack, the weathered storyteller, took a long sip from his coffee mug before continuing, his voice low and grave. "The legend of the Shadow Woman is not merely a ghost story, my friends," Jack said, his gaze sweeping over the gathered rangers. "Over the years, there have been numerous sightings of this ghostly figure, and each encounter has left an indelible mark on those unfortunate enough to cross her path." The rangers exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts pounding in their chests as they listened to Jack's words. Many of them had heard whispers of the Shadow Woman during their time at Whispering Pines, but none had dared to speak of her openly, as if the mere mention of her name might summon her presence. "Park rangers and visitors alike have reported seeing a ghostly female figure in the darkness of the forest," Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They describe her as a woman with long, flowing hair and a white dress that seems to glow in the moonlight. But it's not just her appearance that strikes fear into the hearts of those who encounter her. It's the overwhelming sense of dread that accompanies her presence, a feeling that seeps into your very bones and chills you to the core." The rangers shuddered, their minds conjuring images of the ghostly apparition that haunted the woods they called home. Some of them had experienced that very same sense of dread while on patrol, a feeling that made them quicken their pace and glance nervously over their shoulders, as if something sinister were lurking just out of sight. "Those who have seen the Shadow Woman speak of a strange compulsion that comes over them," Jack went on, his voice growing more urgent. "They say it's like a siren's call, a pull that draws them deeper into the woods, away from the safety of the trails and the comfort of civilization. It's as if she wants them to follow her, to become lost in the labyrinthine depths of the forest, never to be seen again." The rangers looked at each other, their faces pale in the flickering light of the campfire. They knew all too well the dangers that lurked in the heart of Whispering Pines, the way the forest could swallow a person whole, leaving no trace behind. "Some of those who have followed the Shadow Woman have never been seen again," Jack said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "They vanish into the woods, never to return, their fate a mystery that haunts their loved ones and the rangers who search for them. Others have been found, but they are changed, their minds shattered by the horrors they witnessed in the depths of the forest. They return in a state of shock, unable to speak of what they saw, their eyes haunted by a darkness that never truly leaves them." The rangers sat in silence, the weight of Jack's words hanging heavy in the air. They had all taken an oath to protect the visitors of Whispering Pines, to keep them safe from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. But how could they protect against a threat that defied explanation? A ghostly figure that seemed to possess an unearthly power over those who encountered her. And though the legend of the Shadow Woman filled their hearts with fear, they knew that they could not let that fear consume them. They had a duty to uphold, a sacred trust to keep. As the rangers sat in contemplative silence, the weight of their responsibility hanging heavy on their shoulders, Jack cleared his throat once more. His eyes held a distant look, as if he were recalling a memory long buried, something that haunted him still. "Rule 1 may be our first line of defense against the Shadow Woman," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But even the most vigilant among us can fall victim to her allure. I know this all too well, for I myself have had a close encounter with the darkness that lurks within these woods." The rangers huddled closer around the campfire, their eyes fixed on Jack's weathered face. The old ranger took a deep breath, his gaze distant as he delved into the depths of his memory. The air seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening as if drawn to the tale that was about to unfold. "It was many years ago," Jack began, his voice low and somber. "Back when I was just a young ranger, fresh out of training and eager to prove myself. I had heard the stories of the Shadow Woman, of course. We all had. But like many young fools, I thought myself invincible, untouchable by the darkness that lurked in the heart of Whispering Pines." The rangers leaned in closer, their breaths held in anticipation, as Jack continued his tale. I was on my first solo patrol, assigned to the deepest, most remote part of the forest. It was a moonless night, the kind of darkness that seems to swallow you whole, and I had only my flashlight and my wits to guide me. Jack paused, his hand trembling slightly as he raised his coffee mug to his lips. The rangers waited, their hearts pounding in their chests, as he gathered his thoughts. I had been walking for hours, my feet aching and my mind wandering. When I first saw her, Jack whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackling of the campfire. She was standing at the edge of a small clearing, her white dress glowing in the beam of my flashlight. At first, I thought she was lost, a hiker who had wandered off the trail and become disoriented in the darkness. The rangers exchanged uneasy glances, their minds conjuring images of the ghostly figure that haunted the woods. I called out to her, my voice echoing through the trees, but she didn't respond, Jack continued, his brow furrowed as he lost himself in the memory. Instead, she turned and walked deeper into the woods, her movements fluid and graceful, almost as if she were floating above the ground. The rangers shuddered, their skin crawling at the thought of the Shadow Woman's unearthly presence. They had all heard the stories of those who had followed her, never to be seen again, and the thought of their friend and mentor falling victim to her allure was almost too much to bear. I knew I should have turned back, should have radioed for backup and reported the sighting, Jack said, his voice heavy with regret. But something compelled me to follow her, a curiosity that bordered on obsession. I had to know who she was, what she wanted, and why she haunted the depths of Whispering Pines. The rangers held their breath, their hearts in their throats, as Jack described the chase that followed. The winding trails and tangled underbrush, the whispered voices that seemed to echo from every shadow, the growing sense of dread that settled in the pit of his stomach. I don't know how long I followed her, Jack admitted. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness of the forest. All I knew was that I had to keep going, had to unravel the mystery that lay at the heart of the Shadow Woman's legend. The rangers leaned forward, their eyes wide with fear and fascination, as Jack recounted the moment that would haunt him for the rest of his days. I had just pushed through a particularly dense thicket when I saw her again, standing at the edge of a small stream. She turned to face me, her eyes glowing in the darkness, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was then that I realized the truth. She wasn't lost, wasn't human. She was something else entirely, a being of shadow and mist, a creature of the forest that had claimed countless lives over the centuries. Jack's voice trembled as he described the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over him, the icy tendrils of fear that wrapped around his heart and squeezed the breath from his lungs. He spoke of the sudden, desperate need to flee, to put as much distance between himself and the Shadow Woman as possible. I turned to run, my legs pumping beneath me, my lungs burning with the effort, Jack said, his eyes distant as he relived the terror of that moment. But no matter how fast I ran, I could feel her presence behind me, drawing ever closer, her icy breath on the back of my neck. The rangers shivered, their own fears rising to the surface as they imagined the horror of being pursued by the Shadow Woman, of feeling her ghostly fingers grasping at their heels. Just when I thought all was lost, when I could feel the icy touch of her hand on my shoulder, I remembered Rule 1, Jack said, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heart. I closed my eyes, my lips moving in a silent prayer, and started to count. 1, 2, 3. The rangers held their breath, their own hearts racing in sympathy as they listened to Jack's tale of terror and survival. When I reached 10 and opened my eyes, she was gone, Jack whispered, his voice raw with emotion. The forest was silent, the only sound the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I stumbled back to the trail, my mind reeling from the encounter, and made my way back to the ranger station. The rangers sat in stunned silence, their faces pale in the flickering light of the campfire. I learned a valuable lesson that night, Jack said, his voice heavy with the weight of his experience. The rules are there for a reason, not just to protect the visitors, but to protect us as well. The Shadow Woman is a force beyond our understanding, a being of darkness and mystery that cannot be reasoned with or tamed. Our only hope is to stay vigilant, to follow the rules, and to pray that we never find ourselves in her crosshairs. As the campfire burned low and the Rangers prepared to retire for the night, Jack's story lingered in their minds. They knew that they could never let their guard down, never allow themselves to be lured into the depths of the forest by the siren's call. In the years that followed, Jack's story would become a part of the lore of Whispering Pines, a cautionary tale passed down from ranger to ranger, a reminder of the importance of the rules and the dangers that lurked in the heart of the forest.